We face the difficulties of today and tomorrow. I still have a dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal.
Get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight.
Good evening, all. It's Rod's Views live tonight on Cape Conscious Media. Our journey where we give newer entrants into the political space and so-called smaller political parties an opportunity to share with people what are they offering. I'll have interactions with them, and any questions that you would want to pose, you can pose. You can either email it to rodsviews10@gmail.com or on the Facebook page of Cape Conscious Media, as we are live now. This, as you know, also gets streamed, get uploaded onto the YouTube channel of Cape Conscious Media, as well as Rod's Views after the show. So tonight we've got one of the, not newer political parties, let's rather call them one of the small ones, as they are known. Jama-ah. It's based in Cape Town, but it's a national party. It's got a national presence. And tonight we've got somebody very interesting in the studio who is... he is a premier candidate of Jama-ah. Is it Dr. or Professor Muhammad Haron?
Professor Muhammad Haron, yeah.
Shall I call you Professor or Muhammad?
Yes, Muhammad is fine.
Okay. So, and I'm Rod, Muhammad, thanks.
Thanks for that.
So, Muhammad, I went through your CV. It's quite interesting and it's quite a number of pages. And I see you're quite an academic. You're a teacher. Lecturer, mostly in the religious field, I take it.
Correct, yeah.
And you wrote quite a bit, extensively. And your dad is a late and famous Imam Haron.
Correct, yeah.
So I'm sure he would be proud to see you here today. But good to have you here. You
Thanks.
Come from good stock.
Much appreciated.
And you're not a traditional politician, the way I see it.
Correct.
However, see you are also the party CEO.
That's correct.
And you have now decided to get into formal politics. So, is there anything else you want to add about yourself that you think people should know?
Well, I think, first of all, I express my gratitude to you for creating a space. I think it's just a way of reaching out to communities that we normally don't. I think just coming back to oneself is that, yes, I think as you indicated, I come from a home in which we had a grave loss in the early stage of my life. And of course, the killing of my father was not an easy one to deal with emotionally and psychologically. Over the years, one carried this without expressing one's feelings. But having said that, of course, as you mentioned, I've been in academia. I've taught at schools, primary, high school, and then eventually landed up in the university arena, where I have been for almost 40 years. So basically, much of my time has been spent in that sector, to a degree in isolation, if one can. Of course, as you know, they normally say that university professors are in ivory towers, and perhaps that is to extent true. Although, from what one can gather from my writings, I try to connect it with our communities in different ways, of course. However, though I've been teaching much in religious studies, my PhD was in international relations, which is a totally different arena, so to speak, but I try to make the connection between religion and politics, or religion and international relations, because for me that is a critical part of, sometimes we make a division between what is politics, what is religion is a private issue and private affair. For me, that has never been the case. So I try to, through my writings, try to demonstrate that. And that's basically and so the shift from the academic arena into the political landscape has been quite an interesting shift. But when Honorable Ganief got hold of me, this is the end of COVID, because I used to teach at the University of Botswana for 2 decades, and just in a sense, because of COVID, many expats had to leave. Not that they wanted to retire. We thought we could still have an extended part of that, but that didn't happen. So when I got back home, Ganief said, "Why don't you do some research work for us?" And that's how I jumped onto the Jama-ah bandwagon. And then early last year, he said, "Why don't you take on a CEO job, and just try to sort of work on restructuring, redirecting." And I was all for it, because I just felt, well, it's a good opportunity. And then a few weeks ago, he says, "Why didn't you consider being premier candidate?" Of course, that was done by and that's how I find myself. Not that I wanted to be in this. So all of these little contributions added to where I am at present.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good. University of Botswana, that reminds me of in the early 90s, just before we came into our democracy. I was part of the group that were made up the ANC Civil Service Unit. So some of us went to Botswana.
Okay.
We went to that University of Botswana. I found it quite very interesting. Got to tell you that.
Okay.
So latching on to that is around you then entering into the political arena. So you explained that he asked you and all of that stuff. So what difference did you think you could make by entering?
Well, being, of course, before I got my feet into the political arena as such, as I am now speaking to you as a premier candidate of Al Jama-ah, I still was very much in an administrative position of Al Jama-ah as a CEO. But prior to that, even I was, because of my leanings towards academia and doing research and trying to source information and so forth, I was working with Al Jama-ah to write up its own history. Because for me, any institution, any organization, we need to create space for ourselves, telling the story of how we emerge. And I think the Al Jama-ah story is a very fascinating one. The way they started, how they really struggled. They continue to struggle even up to now, but the point of the matter is, I think just for them participating in the political arena and making a statement and arguing along a particular line, I think for any researcher, more so for those in the religious studies, these are the type of sort of stories that we need to hear and to fill the gaps, because, I mean, we have maybe ACDP there, we have other religious political parties, but have we heard their stories? I think it's important just to have that.
Okay, thanks. We'll get back onto some of that stuff. So I read your manifesto, 40 pages at least, it's not too long.
Yeah.
It makes interesting reading, and a lot of the parties have got manifestos.
Correct.
Know? And some of us would say it's blah 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 blah. It's makes nice reading. They use the right words and all of that stuff. And you're an academic, so you know how to write these things, etc. So What do you think for the ordinary man and woman in the street sets your manifesto apart?
Well, I think firstly is that because we hold on to a set of values that we feel that everybody could align themselves with being universal. And of course, it is also what other traditions also teach. But because of the way it's conveyed, I think, and the way we carry it out, in other words, from an idealistic position to a very realistic one, I think that translating it into reality, I think, is where the challenge is. Now, when we say being accountable or show respect or tolerate the other, then these are values that all communities identify with, but it's how we do so. And I think our party tried to sort of do that through the leadership that we have to show that we have respect. And perhaps I should just give a sort of more concrete example in this. During the past 2 months, more or less, a bit more, we have had 2 major groupings joining our party, which is very interesting. And of course, that's why when we call ourselves small, it's no more that small as we might wish to describe it. We had the nation of...
As a DA calls you.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, indeed. I mean, the Nation of Jesus, as we know, that is Prophet Bushiri's grouping. Prophet Bushiri comes from Malawi, of course, but he had a run-in with our government, as you know. I mean, we're not going to go into that story. We were interested in the people who belong to that church, who are South Africans, who are committed South Africans, who are dedicated citizens, and we approached them, or they rather approached us, and we said, why not? And they saw our values, and they could identify with these. And as a result of that, they've jumped on board. So which means that we have at least more or less 2 million potential voters who might come to our assistance, giving us a totally different type of visibility as such. That is sort of one group. The other group, interestingly, is of course, the Pan-Africanist Congress. And some of us come from that background, black consciousness, grew up in that type of environment when, of course, they internally had a tiff. There's still very much a court case hanging. But Comrade Molotto and his crowd, who were basically left out of that sort of grouping as such, they also interacted with us. And as a result, they've jumped on board without any formal agreements as such and said, look here, we will help you. Because what Honorable Hendricks, and this is where Honorable Hendricks' leadership comes, into play, that he's fairly open to anyone associated with the former liberation movements, because he just feels that they were shortchanged, and rightly so. Yeah, not rightly so in terms of shortchanged, but they were shortchanged in terms of course, him bringing them on board. And I think he was fairly open to that, and through discussions and so forth, in the end, this is where we are. So if we look at our numbers have expanded almost within the 2 months quite enormously.
Significantly.
Yeah, and that in itself is very telling.
So let's see what happens on the polls.
Correct. So when you come to our manifesto and the values that we share there and the directives that we basically say, of course, we talk about employment like everybody else, but we try to describe that in a different way. We say decent work. And what do we mean by decent work? Anybody who is basically given a job, he or she should be at least have a pension. All of these sort of, I don't like to call it perks, but dimensions of work need to help to secure the individual. So pension is one of them. The idea of them getting medical aid is yet another, because many of our workers, they've got no medical aid. Where do they go to? So we are concerned with those conditions that need to be addressed and not basically, half-baked. In other words, just give them a job and after 2 months we just release them. Because I think in that way we unsettle our communities. So it's a matter of having to really, and this is, relates to the whole issue of social justice, economic justice, and others, notion of justice. How fair are we towards our community? So we try to address that part in a way that we try to be proactive, we try to really open the space in such a way that we recognize our people in the best way possible.
Okay, thanks. Can I before we get into, there's a few things that some people raised that, and I thought let me raise it with you. And you mentioned the group of Jesus and the faction of the PAC. So some guys are saying, or not guys, some people are saying that you guys are in essence a religious party and primarily for Muslims. What is your response to that? I think you start giving, but give a sense to that. I'm sure you guys hear it regularly.
A fair question and a rightful one in the circumstance we are. I think, yes, it started off as a Muslim party. In other words, it started out in a mosque. And so the sacrosanct environment in which it started out meant that, of course, the party needed to always touch base with its sort of religious ideals and, of course, with those values that are embedded in this. So, yes, it started off like that. But over time, and this is part of what I've been busy writing up, was that the party under Honorable Ganief opened itself saying that whilst we are embedded in religious values and ideals, but these are not necessarily owned by Muslims. They are owned by Christians, they're owned by Jews, they're owned by other religious traditions as well. So in response to that, the party felt that it needs to open itself, and that is why the subtitle of it's a political platform for all. And that new description, which was basically just, I think, at the time when Al-Khanif entered parliament, so he tried to open that base to a larger audience, to a larger membership. And as a result of that, in fact, even before that, we have councillors who are not Muslim, who come from Christian homes. There's a councillor, Tkele, who's in Harding. He's a devoted Christian. The executive mayor of Johannesburg is a devoted Christian. The councillor Cabello in Northwest, he's a devoted. So in other words, they could see these values that we have. They felt quite at home and thus joined it. So in that way, we also open up the space that if they are able to serve in councillor positions or in any other position, we were all open to that. And I think, so the idea of having developed, yes, as a Muslim party, yes, we acknowledge that. We still hold on to those values, but we sort of just open up our sort of doors to everybody who could see that, identify with it, and sort of feel comfortable with it. If, of course, there are individuals who feel differently about some of these, they have a right to question, debate, discuss, and let's come to, find some common ground.
Okay.
But because after all, the idea is political parties for what? Not just for Muslims. It needs to serve our communities, and that is what it's all about.
Okay. So just a follow up on that is in a trend of that question, then I'll move off from that point. Is that some is arguing that it's good and well to say all of that, but when you amongst Muslims,
All right.
then you have a different message. If you around the other crowd, then you have a more open or different message as well. Just briefly, just
an important question, I think. I think inevitably anyone who starts from within a religious tradition will try to encourage, will try to basically give a structure to it in such a way that you identify with those ideals within your religious tradition. So that has happened. That has been the case. So in a sense, to sort of the way you couch it, yes, to a degree it is so. But we also realize that we live in a society that is secular, that is perhaps predominantly Christian. So it is also time that we realize that we cannot live in our own cocoons. We need to share these values across the board. So we might be speaking internally amongst ourselves, say as Muslims, about our Muslimness, so to speak, but we also need to see ourselves beyond the box, so to speak, or beyond the house, or beyond ourselves, and say we need to connect with others where there's common ground, common humanity,
Okay.
common sensitivity. So in that way, I think the conversation shifts into more openness rather than
Okay.
restrictiveness.
Okay, fair. So, you spoke about your honorable leader, Ganief Hendricks. There's a view also that he is the Uber leader. So, his word is the last and the final word. He is the one that determines what happens there. What would you tell those people who are of that view?
He's kind of Übermensch, if we can use a German phrase.
Yes.
He's not that Übermensch as they believe him to be, but let's sort of just structure that. I think within the party, and this is perhaps where we differ also from other political parties, we function in what we call the amirship. Amirship is a more known within the Muslim circles or political circles rather than somebody who leads. You need to obey that structure, otherwise, everything goes haywire. But that is one part to it. The other part to that, and complements and unpacks it somewhat differently, is that yes, whilst he might be the leader, he can be critiqued as well. We can engage with him and say, but Mr. Leader, your idea is not really that acceptable because of A, B, and C, and D. And then he will shift accordingly.
So he accepts.
Indeed. So that Übermensch notion of him or Uber leadership is not really true unless you interact with him. Let me put it this way too. He comes from a very rich background. Rich in a sense, he was a teacher. He was in a corporate arena. He worked for Nestle. He worked for, I think, MTN or whatever. No, not
Wasn't he a trade unionist as
a trade union as well. He ran a very fascinating program that I say fascinating because he, in the 1990s when radio stations became now the norm, he was on Radio 76 and he ran a legal program on labor law. And he was a fundi. He's still a fundi in labor law. I mean, ask me anything, he'll solve it. We have a problem, as workers. So in other words, so he comes with that baggage. And somebody with that baggage, I think, has a rich legacy to draw from. And we could see this in his own leadership. Sometimes we would argue something, then he would come out with, something else. And then we'd say, but why do you think like that? Because I basically picked that up when I was at Nestle. This is how he did so. So for us, I think I might be more or less, not sort of as old as he, but having also gained much experience I could see where his wisdom comes from. And so in a sense, we sometimes mistake his wisdom for being somewhat a dictatorial character, which is not the case. It is just that he throws it out, but he pursues it because he wants to see how far can you see that wisdom really unfolding. So, these are some, of course, again, and maybe I should just relate the story if you don't mind. There were a group of funders. This was October last year, and they want to take over the party. Come from outside, no political sort of skills, or they were not involved, but they think they have lots of money. They can waltz into this party, take it over, and run its finances. So of course we all part of it, and we say, but Mr. Hendricks, we can't allow this to happen. These guys just want to think they can use their money and change our whole direction. So the point which I want to make was that, and one of them said, well, it's just a soft takeover. It's a hijack. I mean, we're not in this. We are here for, you've delivered up to now they want to take over whatever you... So what we're saying is that there are certain people who also don't like him. They told him, please step aside and we'll move on. Okay. I mean, how can you do that? This man has sacrificed himself. He plowed his own money into the party, and I think we need to respect that and don't take advantage of it. And so, unfortunately, these are I suppose, not only our party, I suppose other parties have similar stories, maybe differently, but, Yeah, these are the internal challenges.
Okay. So can I come? I mean, because you guys are in, luckily you guys are in an executive authority position in one of our biggest cities, Joburg.
Correct.
The mayor, you guys got one member, and that member is the mayor as well.
Correct.
So we've got an executive mayorship system in South Africa. So a mayor is quite a powerful person.
Very much so.
It's got a lot of authority and all of that stuff. And it's one of our major cities. So, there's generally the thing that people are saying that our cities are in disarray. Joburg in particular.
Correct. That's what we
People talk about the potholes, they talk about you name it, all of that stuff. Traffic lights not working, the water issues, all of those things. So is that then not, all of those problems, doesn't it lay at the door of Jama-ah? Because Jama-ah is in essence in the leadership of Joburg.
Correct.
Not any other part, although the ANC and the EFF and all of them are there, but it lays with Jama-ah. What's your response to that?
Yeah, thanks for this question. I think it has popped up at different fronts, different times, and of course, we have our executive mayor's name is Councillor Kabelo Gwamanda, and Gwamanda is a very strategic thinker, as such. From if you know him personally, but interestingly is that he's in coalition, or rather, our party is coalition with others, with basically 8 others, which means that we 9 of the 9th one. Of course, we're not going to go into the detail of the unpacking this particular problem, but you will recall that we had another member of our party was before Kawamanda came into that seat, was in that seat, and it was then that Gayton Mackenzie had problems with this Muslim fellow because he comes from African background, but he was there for 2 months, and he also was not to the liking of some of the members of the other members, and he was then replaced. So he resigned, and this is where Kawamanda came in. The sort of challenge that Kawamanda has, from our understanding, is partly that he couldn't bring in members of our party into positions, which means to assist, to advise, to do the logistics and whatever you. So he basically is very much dependent upon the earlier guard that had been left behind, your ANC members and maybe others that had seats. And as a result, there's an internal struggle, so to speak, if I can describe it as a struggle, for him really to see that his decisions are taken seriously and implemented. So anyone who is in that position will find himself in a very difficult position. So whilst people have right to basically say, but the water issue in, say, Randfontein, is an issue that he didn't address properly, and this issue sometimes is given to a group within that
but
committee.
Can I just come back in there? The issue is not about him. The issue is the party, because he represents Jama-ah.
Of course, indeed.
So, I'm asking you, what is Jama-ah's view on? I understand all the coalitions and so he's only one person, and there's MICO members and all of that stuff.
Correct, yeah.
But at the end of the day, he represents Jama-ah. He doesn't represent himself.
No, true. I think that is. You're right. What Honorable Ganief tried to do was to keep that lines of communication open with him, just to direct him, to assist him, and I think this is where we do take a degree of responsibility for maybe not, if I can put it, non-action or not really achieving the goals that we had set. But on the other hand, I think from the position that he had been in, he has received a clean audit for the period, which again, despite all the other criticism, the mere fact that he was able to demonstrate to getting a clean audit is an indication that he can get something done. Not necessarily to the satisfaction to the, to the communities. And this is where the party can at least hold its head high. But this is, again, remains a challenge. And of course, you're right. He represents us as a party. And how do we, and I think this is perhaps where the continuous difficulties are, and how to deal with them is not maybe smooth flowing one. And also giving directives from Cape Town, for example, to somebody in Johannesburg.
Micromanaging him, you're from Cape Town.
And you can't do that.
So you guys trying to micromanage him?
No, we're not trying to, because we feel that he has the ability to demonstrate leadership. But it seems that he gets either tangled or stuck within the family that he's operating. Because after all, yes, he might be our member, but he's operating with other individuals that is part of the extended mayorship family. And that is where the challenge remains.
So let me follow up on that. So because you guys are in essence in a coalition with ANC, EFF, and others.
Yeah.
And so some people would say if you vote for Al Jama-ah, in essence you're voting for the ANC or the EFF. And you guys are also called to an extent ANC light for some of the positions that your leader take in parliament, where they either votes with the ANC or he abstains on certain things. And the same, some people are saying what's happening in the city of Cape Town.
Right.
So what is your, that assertion that you guys are really ANC light? A vote for you is really a vote for the ANC because you guys are going to go into cahoots with them in any case?
No, I think, those are sort of issues that we have encountered. But I think the point which we need to make, and very clearly, is that we are not affiliated in any way to the ANC, and therefore they might sort of jokingly say we're ANC light. We are not. We're basically sort of different in our sort of outlooks and our understandings. And this comes to the Bella Bill, for example. We totally disagree with the ANC on that. We reject it out of hand for several reasons. But I think what Honorable Ganief does when certain bills do, where he sees there's no need really to disagree with the ANC, he will support. But where he feels the need to critique it, he does so. And I think he does so openly and very clearly and bluntly, partly because we don't really identify with these, like the Bella Bill. The other one was the Intelligence Act that was also being amended. We also have major differences with that. And in fact, you might have heard that that our president signed in the Divorce Act amendments. That was not because Honorable Ganief was involved in that whole process. And the way it has been signed in was without consulting the party that was involved in it, as well as other stakeholders. And so at the moment, we are busy writing a text responding to that issue. So what we are saying here is that where we feel that we need to differ on solid grounds, on substantial grounds, we do so. And I think, and in that way, I think ANC sometimes don't like that, but I think it is, we stand our ground, partly because we disagree. And of course, where we feel that we can support it, as long as in the interest of our communities, then we do so. So there are these differences that we make.
So can I follow up on that point, and then we can step off that. There's a sense that when Zuma was the president, Jacob Zuma was the president.
Okay.
That your leader was one of the people that were fairly supportive or protective of Zuma. And Zuma is now the leader of the MK party, and there are indications that the MK party could become a key player. So are you guys also not, to an extent, in any case, going to do a deal with the MK party, whether it's in writing or not, but there's this history there? What do you say to that?
Well, I think basically we sort of we haven't met MK leadership as such, but let me just backtrack to the point you made. Yes, I think when Zuma was, and he still is in the situation that he is, I think Omar Ganief felt that, yes, he's an elderly gentleman in the political arena, in this nation state. Just give him a break. Let's sort of, draw lines and let him move on with his life. And let's focus on the real sort of issues as such. Why spend so much money in trying to fight him? And why not also look at those people who had advised him? Because many of those advisors, they got loose. They are basically, they've disappeared. Whether it's the Sheikh brothers, whether any of the others, yes, this man is now staying his own. Nobody's coming to his aid. So, and of course, him having been in the fight against apartheid, of course, he has made mistakes. He's overlooked certain things. So let's just give him a break and move on. So just trying to make that point. But I think in terms of the current scenario, up to now, whatever's happened in MK, none of their leaders have ever knocked on our door to say, look, would you be interested in coming? I think we are also weighing up these internally, just trying to digest what are their moves, what are their positions, and where do they get their funding from? Because as you might know, any party that gets Zionist funding, our position, we would not in any way want to cooperate with that party. Mm-hmm. So whether it's a small party, whether it's a big one, we basically draw a thick line. So as you indicated, if it, for example, comes to the ANC and so forth, we'll have to wait. In other words, in the Western Cape, we would like to see the DA basically to show them the door if they do make that, are able to get out, and we find ourselves in a.
Shall we talk about that a bit later?
All right. Okay. No problem.
Let's talk about briefly touch on global issues. Obviously, your position on Palestine is quite clear. Maybe you can tell people briefly, tell them again what it is. Okay. And then also, what's your position on Ukraine and Russia as well? And what would your response be to people who say some of your opponents in the political field who's saying that Action SA, Patriotic Alliance and others, that they should rather the focus should be on South Africa,
correct,
getting South Africa right, before we spend so much energy on Palestine and others. What's your response to that?
Yeah, thank you. I think there are sort of two issues that we must consider. First of all, in South Africa, we fought for social justice or social reform, for a better society, for a just society, for fair society. We know the TRC was there, but one of the key values or words that was absent in the TRC was justice. It talks about truth, it talks about reconciliation, but it doesn't talk about justice. So this word has become so elusive, so to speak, that we need to revisit it and to give it the necessary meat that it sort of deserves. So bearing that in mind, and this comes to the second point, so wherever there's injustice, we feel we need to speak out, whether it's locally, whether it is internationally. I think there is a need for us to basically do so. But the third dimension to this is the issue that when we look at Palestine as an example, we find that the Palestinian Christians and Muslims, even Jews who are Palestinians, who see themselves as Palestinians, were shortchanged by the Zionist state, by the state of Israel, because they have, in a sense, muzzled the voices of any grouping or any organization that spoke out against justice within that sort of region or within that specific community. And so because of what has happened since 7th of October, of course, the issue of Palestine comes a long way since 1948. So there are a lot of other issues but at this present moment, we just feel that the Zionist state has really transgressed international law in a big way, and we need to take cognizance of that. And what have they done? They've destroyed they've massacred, they've killed, they've committed genocide in front of our eyes, and yet we do not say a word against it. And they don't want to be critiqued for that because they use the notion of defense. They're defending the right. We are not saying the defending yourself is not acceptable, but the way they've been treating the Palestinians over generations has been totally unfair. And now, whatever's happened there, it amounts to a Holocaust. And yet the Holocaust, they argue, is only for themselves, as if it doesn't happen to others. We know the Namibian case, where the Namibian government also took up the issue with the Germans. So basically there are commonalities and we need to recognize them. And I think this is where our party and other parties basically feel in a similar way that we need to really at least give attention to those, as ANC did, of course, on behalf of the nation. But coming back to the other parties then, in terms of, yes, I mean, we also feel that we need to give attention to what
happens in South Africa.
And we need to attend. I mean, you go to Khayelitsha, you go to, in fact, I've been traveling now with the party on 3 or 4 or 5 occasions across the country. And we all come from the anti-apartheid struggle, and we ask ourselves, are we really in a democratic South Africa where there's still no water, there's still no electricity, people have to walk distances, there's no latrines, and you ask, what has our government done to our people? They've done a disservice. They have not serviced our community. Honorable Hendricks set up a fishing vessel in Mapami village, which is sort of deep into Eastern Cape. Why hasn't government do that? We have set up a peanut butter factory in Groudville, where Malotudi, who is the daughter-in-law of Chief Albert Lutuli, set up to service those communities. We've set up an agricultural institute, which is not up and running as yet. The building is done, with the hope of training local farmers. Now, what these all indicate is that as a party, we try to be proactive as possible to serve the communities. But whilst we're doing that, we do not in other words, we don't overlook what's happening elsewhere. So we try to connect all of these injustices in whichever way possible to put it on the radar and basically share it with others. So locals must be also familiar with injustice that happens there. And through education, through different ways of interacting to say, look here, wherever injustices are, we need to speak out against it. We need to, reflect upon it. But at the same time, be mindful of our neighborhood, where there's injustices.
So can I follow up on that? So there's a view that it's fine. So should South Africa be driven by this human rights kind of approach and anti-injustice?
Correct.
And at the same time, it might negatively affect people who are doing business in South Africa, who might have strong links with Israel and so on. And that would impact around the social ills that we have, unemployment, all of that stuff. So should we say, listen, irrespective of that, we got to cut ties with these businesses that are investing in South Africa? They mustn't be here. We mustn't import their stuff and all of that stuff. What's your view to the people who argue like that?
Let me just sort of add to that point that you're making. We were in Eastern Cape not too long ago. There was a businessman there, quite a well-known businessman in his circles, and he was telling us the United Arab Emirates business persons have come into Eastern Cape, and what do? They found company A, B, and C, and D. They buy them over. What do they do with the workers? The workers just get sacked. So who basically responds to that? So, of course, apart from the Zionist entity in the Western Cape and elsewhere, I mean, that to us is totally unacceptable. That is, practices in the business arena that we shouldn't even allow. Investors, we need to have a policy where we tell investors, if you do invest, these are not acceptable, these are acceptable. Others based upon our terms, not their terms. And so that example, this struck us. Why should these people come in and do this to our communities? Not their communities, our communities. Why should they buy a building just because they have a few million to splash around, and they do a disservice to our communities? So that is what we are concerned.
So irrespective if because I know you want to continue on that further on that point, but so irrespective whether those business people, because you say they're from Saudi Arabia
or Emirates or whatever,
and so on. So irrespective if they are Muslim businesses,
they have nothing to
and
do
they
with
mistreat our people.
Correct.
So
If they mistreat, they mistreat. We know how they mistreat the workers who come from Philippines, who come from other areas. So we cannot identify with that type of business practices. I mean, we know even of domestic workers who come from Philippines who look after their families who are abused. Of course, they don't speak out against it. The moment you speak out, you'll be pushed out of the country almost overnight. So in the same way, whatever injustice they do to we don't want them to transfer it into our communities. Our communities, we want safe areas, we want security, we want them to be protected and to be given the voice they need, freedom. And so let me come to the other part to that. Of course, they've also, by the way, supported the Zionist state. And in fact, there's a fascinating story going on in that aspect too, because they're destroying Gaza and they're rebuilding Gaza, and they already have a plan in place for the next 35 years, bringing in all these rich Arabs to invest there. At whose expense? Those very people who were killed. Those children who are motherless and fatherless. So, coming to the Zionists again, they have a project, let's put it in a different way. As far as their policies and beliefs are concerned, we are non-entities. We are just human beings, but according to their understanding, they are the chosen people. And as chosen people, they have a right over every one of us. So they don't really care if we die, if we struggle and be killed in the process, because what's our life worth? And so they're coming into South Africa, coming into the Western Cape, coming from Gauteng, where they have had investments, coming to the Western Cape, and trying to do a similar stance. In other words, you and I can't even afford to buy a 3-room bedroom in Sea Point. It'll cost us 3, 4, 5 million. Why? Because they're coming in with the euros, they're coming in with the dollars, and you and I can't compete. We only have the pitiful rand that we have. Whether it's 1,000, whether it's 1 million, that million is basically a quarter of. So what we are saying here is that there are injustices that we cannot see with the naked eye, that are taking place stealthily, and we need to make our communities aware that this is happening. And if we don't do so, we will only be taken, in other words, we will be ultimately or eventually controlled by these investors who will ultimately dictate what our future will be. And this is where the challenge is. And this is part of the neoliberal policies that we seem to overlook.
I'm sure we can have a fascinating discussion around Zionism and all of that.
Yeah.
That would be quite an interesting discussion. But let's get back now to some of the practical national issues confront South Africans. And one is unemployment.
Correct.
It's unacceptably high. We don't even need to debate that. What will you guys do practically to address it?
Well, I think the first...
Either nationally or
Right.
even in the Western Cape.
Okay, of course, either way it's the same. We just feel that all stakeholders, when we say all stakeholders, from private sector, companies, asset managers, whichever companies they are, pharmaceutical companies, they have to come to the table. And we need to work out a plan together to address that, because the government can't do it on its own. Parties can't do it on their own. They've got to work with others. And I think in a serious, a sincere way. I add these words partly because they are critical. We're not just there for ourselves. And this is the issue. That as party leaders and as political parties, we should be there for our communities. 24/7, so to speak. Partly because we come from those communities. We've seen how they suffered. we're seeing the high unemployment rate. Why do we perpetuate, like the example I gave you early on, about these investors coming, buying over companies, and then letting the workers loose without having accumulated nothing? How unfair, how unacceptable. So we need to bring back our value system. Our notion of Ubuntu need to be given life, because after all, I'm here because of you. And that sort of philosophy needs to be embedded in our psyche, in our practice, in our day-to-day. So we would say that, I mean, perhaps it's a long, because we cannot solve it overnight. But I think a step has to be made where we work together.
Okay, I hear you about the fact that they got to work together, and government and business and all of that stuff. So besides working together and having meetings and all that, what practically, give me just one, it doesn't need to be 1, 2 or 3, just give me one practical thing besides them working together. You say working together.
Let's take we come from the Cape. What did we see in the past? Clothing industry booming. What has happened to them? It just disappeared, as if we don't have dressmakers anymore, no tailors anymore. Basically, sectors of our industry was just, crushed almost to death. We need to revive that, because there are youngsters, individuals who have the ability, who have the skills, as a result in their families where they were trained how to do certain things. So we need to revive those sectors where we can really give individuals or communities the opportunity to find themselves again. So the clothing industry is one of those. The building industry is yet another. We rely on migrants coming from Zimbabwe. Why should we do that when we have sterling, outstanding bricklayers, outstanding builders? But this is also where the downside has been, which has been sad, from very builders who come from the very community, who shortchange their very community. I mean, you want just a room built, they charge you, an arm and a leg. Why should they be doing so when they are living good lives? They've got a double story, they quite well. So there are other dimensions to...
What's happening in George, like employing a lot of poor people from other parts of Africa. It just irks you. I mean, you just don't have words to express this. But I think something has to be done at some point. I mean, I heard the Minister of Economic, Mr. Patel. He addressed one gathering a few nights ago, and he was talking. Of course, he was also reminded about the clothing industry, and he came from those unions. And we sort of asked a question. Now, of course, this is again in response. How do we revive that when the Chinese continue to throw their cheap goods into our market, which lasts for 1 week or 1 month or whatever the case may be? Of course, the Chinese are there also to milk us, I feel. We need to change our policies pertaining to investors and give the necessary empowerment to our communities who have the skills, give recognition, and open up those. I mean, can I ask you, because I want to move off this, is the one thing is that you're talking about reviving industries like even the clothing industry, etc., and getting young people, etc. But as you know, that the world has evolved.
True.
And lots of young people got other skills or want to do other stuff.
Right.
So should we continue to anchor about the past, or should we embrace the future and position our people to deal with that in terms of dealing with the unemployment issue perspective?
For us, it's a bridging of the past with the future. In other words, we must create a workforce that is multi-skilled, and we haven't done so. We've created mono-skilled. What happened to our teachers who just taught mathematics or history? All of a sudden, the person can't go further. So we need to open up that opportunity for reskilling that contributes towards this sort of the issue of employment. In other words, it basically goes again the idea of creating joblessness. So you reskill and you redirect. And I think this is where a plan has to be put on the table, where we can work in certain sectors where we can create that bridge. So the future, you're right. I think people are looking in other avenues and so forth, but we cannot look at other avenues if we don't look at the past. What was the past like? What do we grab from the past? What do we take to the present? And from the present, how do we carve out the future? So there's an interconnectedness, and I think we seem to have just leaped. And let me give you one example quickly. In the 1990s, I was at university, UWC at the time, and what did Kader Asmal and his company do? They decided to reduce universities. They closed teacher training colleges. For what? For whom? Who advised them to do that? Was it the World Bank? And this is where the problem we have with international organizations that dictate to our societies. And so now we have a lack of teachers. We have an overproduction of doctors who can't be accommodated in hospitals. Something is amiss with our planning, and that needs to be addressed.
Can I come back to another practical question that people are grappling with? And that's a question of crime and feeling safe in our country and in our communities. What are the kind of things that you guys would do to give people a sense, women and children and elderly people and just all of us,
correct,
a sense that you are safe, that you can walk around, you can enjoy yourself, and that we live, South Africa or the Western Cape is a safer place. What would you guys do practically?
Well, here again, I suppose on an idealistic level, all security clusters need to be sort of dealt with, so to speak, in terms of engaging with them. Because after all, they come from these communities. They don't come from elsewhere. So we need to sort of reflect on their position, their status. That's the one part of it. The other part, the crime that, the proliferation of gangs need to be addressed. I think they come from homeless communities, they come from jobless communities, they come from those very issues that you and I have been talking about and that we are all familiar with, and we have to really grapple with that and ask, how do we basically help even these gangs to be educated, to be skilled, and to use their skill leadership? I think back of Stakis and others, and ask myself, why couldn't these guys use their skills in a better way? Why use it for gangs and influencing the thinking at that level? There are different ways. So once again, maybe I'm not giving a concrete response to your question, but I just feel, again, it's a matter of having to bring in all of these parties together, because after all, we live together. We live in an area where, now we have the mafia, in the building area, the mafias. How do we basically... Construction mafias. All of these we are affected by. We have mafias along in the fishing industry. The Chinese have come, and we've allowed the proliferation of these without really having gained control. And as a result, we have gained, we're basically out of control. So all of these things will have to be, but like we said, it's a multi-pronged approach, but with all stakeholders, whoever is in that sector or across sectors, need to be spoken to, need to be engaged with. So, as I say, I'm not answering your concrete question, but I think it's trying just to say how we will tackle it.
What's your view about parole, minimum sentence, people getting, and the death penalty?
Well, I think the death penalty can be a deterrent. Of course, now this is perhaps to do with the neoliberal environment, global village that we are in.
So you guys are in support of the death penalty?
Well, if it comes to that, of course, the Constitution says otherwise.
Yeah, the
so we
yeah.
need to then revisit the constitutional and make the necessary amendments. But knowing the mindset at present, I mean, whether it's the ANC or even the DA, I don't think that they will easily go down that route. But it's a route that other parties, I think one or two other parties have been arguing along those lines. But I think it's not something that we will overlook and say, well, we've got to stick to the constitution. We need to work in the interest of the community. But again, all of these penalties or sort of legislation needs to factor in our circumstances and how do we really change it in a positive way. If we perpetuate a negative, then any death penalty is not going to help.
And parole? What's your view about
parole? I think we need to weigh these. If the courts are also, if the courts also play their role meaningfully, in other words, there are youngsters who have been detained for maybe a petty crime. Why? Because they had nothing on the table. So I think we need to really create a friendly environment, or rather an open environment at least, that give these individuals a second chance. Do not assume that just because they stole once or twice that they will be like that for the rest of their life. I think we misreading human nature. It's a matter of having to read human nature in a positive way. And I think if they feel that warmth, that openness, that we are prepared to give people second chance, I'm sure we can make a change. And if we have all the other issues in a row, the issue of employment, in other words, if he or she is in prison, having been trained as a seamstress or a tailor or a builder, I'm sure they'll do far better the moment they come out, knowing that they were punished for a crime that they had committed.
What's your view about those who say foreigners should be thrown out of South Africa?
Yes, in fact, I was going to give you an example early on. If you go Imam Haron Road, from the top, not necessarily to the bottom, or rather from the bottom, as you go towards just the sort of the...
Okay, now what's the top and what's the bottom?
I was going to tell you.
Well, I don't know.
The bottom is more towards Lansdowne.
Okay.
And the top, of course, is Claremont.
Yes.
But if you go along that road, and how many barbers do you see? How many of those barbers are from outside our communities? You can count them on your fingers, maybe 10, and you ask, why are they all competing? But the more important question, how did they get there? Who basically process their papers? And this is a concern of mine and of us, partly because I just feel that we have been too open to allow foreigners just to waltz in with no papers, finding themselves, bribing somebody to do their papers. So now all of a sudden they are now legal. If you go back, you'll find some of their papers are questionable. And this is where the issue of corruption and bribery has taken place, which remains a concern for us as a party, but for us as a community. And we will have to work through this. So on one hand, you do not say, okay, because you come from Zimbabwe, you don't want to hear. If they come with certain skills and they do contribute in a substantial way and pay tax, then we will create that space and say, Mr. So-and-so has been doing so. And of course, again, we sort of talking, just using one example, but there are many of them who have come in. And how do you control that?
But when you talk about many of them, there's many of them that have come from Europe as well, not only from Africa.
In fact, we know in the late apartheid period, who did they bring in? East Europeans. So you have these surnames that you recognize where they have become South African now, but they originally from East European, and they came in with the blessings of the apartheid state. Why? To beef up the white pigmentation groups. And this is the sad part. And those people still don't want to look at that because they are partly South African now. But they move between their countries and our country easily. But yes, it is not just those from our continent, it is those from other continents, from South Asia, the Bangladeshis, the Pakistanis, the Indians, the Sri Lankans, East Europeans, the Polish and others, all of them are in the same category. And I think we just need to tighten up with the hope that those who come in with certain skills to really transform our country into a better environment, but not misuse. And unfortunately, of course, we have we all have a sort of notion about Nigerians. We all put them in one basket, which is unfair. And there are those who are good, who really contribute, but then there are others who basically undermine us. So those who undermine us, we need to deal with them as firmly as possible.
Okay, I'm sure people got a sense. Can I come to the question of equality and equity? You know, the Constitution provides that we are all equal.
Correct.
So I'm told that your leader is of the view that men should provide for women. As if to say that women can't stand on their own feet and so on. Is that the position of your party?
Not necessarily the position of the party. I think when we talk about equality, men and women are equal. Whether they differ biologically, I think the space is there for both. I think even from a purely religious theological angle, there is this sort of equality, although the understanding, the interpretation has been that they are, of course, they must just be in homes. Having said that, I think the environment in which we are, women should be given opportunity alongside others to go into engineering, to be medical doctors, to be in whichever way they can serve our communities. Of course, when it comes to the sporting codes, we feel women playing rugby, women playing cricket, and so and of course doing wrestling. And from a purely religious angle, we have certain challenges with those. Partly because we just feel that women need not go just to show that they are like the man, powerful.
So women shouldn't go and play rugby.
Yeah, well, basically, basically that, and of course that's also associated with sort of other issues. But we're not saying in a workplace that she can't, participate. I think she should be encouraged to participate because it's contributing to the welfare of the society.
So your sense is there's certain sport codes or certain activities that women shouldn't do.
Agree, yeah.
And then in respect of the view that the man should provide for the woman.
Well, that is, from a purely religious angle, that is what is expected. From a purely Muslim dimension, interpretation of the Quranic text and of course the practices of the Prophet. So the understanding has been that the male in the house, and that is why when it comes to the issue of death, say the father passes away, then the son gets a larger portion. Why? Because the son has to take care of his mum and the siblings. In other words, if there are lots of sisters, he must take care of them until they get married. So in other words, the on the surface, it might appear to be unequal in that sense, but when one looks closer, there's a degree of balance where the male has to sort of is given that responsibility that he should take care of his sisters and so on.
So I want to move off that point, but I just want to conclude it. So what instances if a woman, so woman is in a much better position than the man to provide. So would you guys look askew at that?
No, I think in fact, this is the interesting part. If a woman owns a property, doesn't belong to the husband. In other words, he gets married to Miss A or B who has property. That property is not his. He must still take care of her. In other words,
But what if she's in the position to take care of him and whoever else?
Well, of course, then that's between the understanding amongst them. They can decide within themselves. Although from a purely religious angle, as we say, sort of the man takes it. But just taking your example further is that if the woman, like we have many women these days, they are lawyers, they are professors, they are whatever, they earn much more than their husband or their spouse. And so in these instances, of course, whatever they earn essentially is theirs.
But the husband is still the boss in the house.
The husband can act, and yes, of course, he can, but she can also basically lay her ideas on table and weigh her up. So it's not necessary.
But he is a boss.
I wouldn't use the word boss. Maybe I mean they are partners in a family relationship where, of course.
But he's a more senior person. Let's rather use. Let me not use the word boss.
Yeah, maybe boss or senior. Then, but yes, I mean there should be some understanding of respect and acceptance of the other.
Okay.
And of course, a male would be, from a purely religious angle, be in a sort of highest position vis-a-vis the wife.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to ask, but let me. No, I want to ask in another question. Then.
Okay.
So, would you guys have an issue then if a woman is a premier or the president?
Not at all. In Singapore, who was the president of the country? A woman. Of course, this is using.
No, I'm
example.
not talking about Singapore.
No. I say why not? I mean, no, the same.
So you guys wouldn't have a problem.
We don't have a problem. I mean, we have women. Some candidates, of course, we know. I mean, in very conservative surroundings, some men wouldn't want to even hear that. But we feel that they have a right to express and lead debates if they have the skills.
Okay. Let's move away from. I want to come to corruption. You know, it's a big issue in our country. Yeah. So if there's a allegation of corruption, against one of your members, your leader, or even against you, what should be the approach, or what will be the approach?
Well, in my case, if I am accused of corruption, I've got to stand down almost immediately. If there's substantial evidence. Of course, as we normally say, you are basically innocent until proven guilty. But if again, and this is where the religious conscience comes in. If you know that you were involved, and if you are religiously minded and conscious, because the view is that when you die, from the Muslim standpoint, you will be answerable for whatever you did. Whether you were premier, whether you're a counselor, whether you a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher in a classroom, how do you treat your learners? How do you treat your client in a fair way? Of course, you won't know, I won't know, but that individual knows. So in my case, if there's substantial allegations that Muhammad Haron has done A, B, and C, and D that's wrong, then Muhammad Haron has to step out.
Okay. So there's a few other questions I wanted to ask you about national stuff, but I need to ask some stuff around Western Cape because you're the premier here. But around the land question, which is a vexing thing.
Oh, yes.
What's your people's position around the land question, and particularly, expropriation without compensation?
Well, we basically feel that that should be still part of it, because I think we see eye to eye with other parties along the same line. And maybe I should, if I may, just use an example that I'm, at the moment, our family with many other families are involved in a situation where we were given a plot of ground where a flats has to be built. And of course, these flats basically, I originally come from Claremont. Okay. And so our community, unlike the district's community, were not given vacant land. All of it is taken up by whom? By conglomerates and companies. And now all of a sudden we were given a small plot of ground, and on which we can build a block of flats. And now, of course, we are sitting in meetings and upon meetings, and the issue has not been resolved. But, because now, you had tenders to basically use the plot of land and so forth. But the point which I want to make is that, for me, it was a cop-out from the government side to basically just do that. Because now you must deal with the problem. It's not our problem anymore, which I feel is very unfair. Even pertaining to my own father's place, we are requesting that we just be given a plot of land, so at least we in fact wanted the house back. But for some reason, whoever has been in the land claims department seemed to have skirted that around. And up to now, of course, and over the years, by the way, there were 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals who bought over that plot. So now the plot is basically in a 5th or 6th person's hand, whatever the case may be.
It changed ownership.
Yeah, it changed ownership because now, of course, also the price goes up. But I mean, I'm just using that example as a way to what has happened in this sort of arena. And so it makes it more and more problematic and complex. So coming back to, I think, we just feel that, and of course, it's becoming more complex with time. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, we want that sort of idea to be given life. But we also know that lots of land is being taken over, bought over by others. So in a sense, whether that ideal or the idea that we had with other parties will really bear fruit. But essentially what we know is that the issue of land, on that issue we have been shortchanged. And I think those in that were specialists in the area need to come up with a better...
So you feel the land must be given back, and then those who've got the land, they shouldn't be compensated?
Well, again, it depends where, and because I think there are certain areas that you really can't get the land back, and all because already built up and so forth. But there should be perhaps, in certain cases, should be some form of compensation, because they are, if I may describe it, innocent perhaps from the post-apartheid era, because they bought it within the new era.
They didn't know about it.
It's a very complex issue. I mean that you're raising, and I don't think any of our parties will find a very solid solution to it, because of things that are changing so rapidly that whilst we still on it, but perhaps one can say this: if you go across the country, the number of vacant land that is there belongs to us as South Africans, born and bred, for the period. And one asks a question: why can't some of those lands be opened up to some? Of course, some would say, but it's very far. But far these days is a very relative term these days. But the point, at least as a way of responding to that need. For me, there is enough land for each and every citizen. We're not talking about people coming from outside the country. For our citizens, there's enough. And so, again, I think it has become so problematic, so complex, that we find it's more and more difficult to find a solution. But, yeah.
Okay. We'll, another 10, 15 minutes, is that good for you?
Fine.
The Western Cape is regarded as one of the most unequal parts of South Africa. South Africa is an unequal country between rich and poor and black and white.
Indeed.
How will you guys narrow that gap between rich and poor, or white and black?
That in itself is a major challenge for whoever is in government. But I think what has exacerbated it partly is the way the Democratic Alliance have also played its role in creating a chasm of inequality that we can see. Let's talk about service delivery. We look at the sort of known places, Khayelitsha, Langa, Bonteheuwel, Manenberg, places that have been around for literally a few decades. But the question is, to what extent have the provincial government not shortchanged them? And let's leave our Greater Cape Town. We go to Grabouw, we go to all of these outlying Boelan places. The same story repeats itself. I just drove. Of course, we drove from Eastern Cape through parts of Western Cape, and the beautiful houses that stare you in the face and you ask, who does it belong to? You don't have to really think far about it, and you ask, how did these people manage to have such beautiful places? And those who work so hard, whether it's in a building industry or a textile industry, they remain on the margins. And so we need to work out some form to really bridge that gap. And that gap, again, is not an overnight issue, but I think it's a long-term issue. But long-term means we should do it within 5 years, 10 years, but not longer, because after all, it's an issue that affects us all. we belong to one another. We're part of each other. So we need to build it together. Again, I mean, I've been overemphasizing this idea of building it, together. But again, whether the Mr. A sees the same picture as Mr. B and on the same page, that in itself is a struggle to overcome. But I feel, or rather we feel, that educational system, and this is also where we are shortchanged, by the way, also needs to be jacked up to really service our communities as best as they can.
So Muhammad, let me get onto that. So you become premier.
Mm-hmm.
Your 2 million voters, they voted for Al Jama-ah, and Al Jama-ah has got significant votes and so on, and you become premier. What will you do as a premier to give young people a sense of hope and for them to believe that having an education and studying is worth it?
Good question. And let me put it this way, that for me, I will engage the sort of educational system, or so your teachers or your universities, because these are the hubs where these learners and future individuals who will be skilled will be trained, and they need to be basically engaged with on different levels. One, of talking about the restructuring educational system to a degree that it will serve the community, not restructuring to be just basic elephants, so to speak, white elephants as such. I mean, we find ourselves in a scenario where graduates have moved out, but they don't know where to go. I mean, I myself have 2 sons who found their way into the system, but really can't get a job. And so putting ourselves in their positions, we say, but let's relook at the trainers, the mentors, the university leaders, so that we can, if we have them thinking outside the box, helping to see how these young men and women can be not just retrained, can be trained as such and push into certain directions, then we will probably get that sort of, and if we get that right, I think the future basically, you don't have to think, because now because you have to help them to think where they want to be in the next 10 years, 20 years, and where our country, our economy needs to be, because we want it to really basically pump, so to speak, in a positive way so that everybody can benefit from it. So it's a way of having to just address the educational sector and of course here we're talking about not just pure academic studies, but technical studies, and this is where I feel that our teacher training colleges, our technical institutions, for some reason over the years have been marginalized. Instead of being major players and contributors and producers, they seem to have been pushed aside, and little funding has been channeled in those directions. It's a matter of having to relook at the budget to see in which way it can be rechanneled, and of course with plans in place that these young and emerging young men and women need to be trained in such a way that they will feel quite comfortable with the skills that they have and wherever they go. And I think we have to look at short-term planning, medium-term and long-term. We cannot just think of long-term. But that starts from, so we say within the next 3 years, we'll have to get that equation right. If we can get that right with our young men and women, then I think we basically on the road. If we falter, it will have a snowball effect. So which means that next 3 years will have to be addressed. But we don't want that to happen. We want to see that these things happen within the shorter period of time.
Okay, what do you say about and that's an issue in this election, which is the Western Cape question, where the coloureds are in the majority in the Western Cape and they're in the minority in South Africa. What's your party's position on that?
No, I mean, we are of course, we know that the NCC, for example, is really focusing on the coloured community, we feel, yes, indeed, we sort of agree with that we need to see that the colored community be given their necessary, the space that they deserve, not the way that they have been treated. And this is where we'll have to speak to the national government to engage with them so that they see this argument that we need to address our colored community alongside the African community, of course, but also make sure and ensure rather that the colored community, which is the majority, be given that particular opportunity to be empowered, to change their own lives. But again, where there's small businesses, micro sort of on a micro level, on a macro level, we'll have to just work through those, but address those. We cannot ignore it.
Okay.
It is there. It's an issue.
So this is going to be an interesting election. So some of us are saying that no party is really going to have outright majority in the Western Cape.
Correct, yeah.
I'm one of those people who's of that view. So who will you guys work with and who won't you work with post the election in terms of,
Yeah,
and,
good.
And remember, your party has a track record of working with the ANC and the EFF.
Correct. Yeah, I think we will have to see in the post-election phase as to who, but I think maybe we should just clear this, that any of the parties that, again, I tried to say this early on, who had Zionist funding, basically would not be on our radar in terms of working with.
So what is Zionist funding for those who don't know?
Basically it means that we have seen, for example, the PA, the Patriotic Alliance, getting about 20 million, if not more, from one family. We see Rise Mzansi got about 60 million from the Oppenheimer, and these are the Oppenheimers, all of them, this cabal of families, they belong to the Zionists because they never spoke out against the sort of the Zionist state, against the massacre or the genocide. So those are the parties. Of course, there's a group of them. Bosa is one of them. Usima Imani and
Action
others.
SA?
Action SA is part of them. So they're the DA, of course. I mean, there's no question.
Freedom Front Plus?
The Freedom Front Plus too. I mean, despite the Afrikaner-oriented...
ACDP?
ACDP too. So basically, there's quite
all of them are out?
Basically out in terms of really finding a way, because we just feel that inevitably what the funders try to do, want to redirect them to see that they either, partner, and of course we look at the Moonshot Pact. Who's all in the Moonshot Pact? All of those groupings, except maybe for one or two that don't say, I think the DA has a problem with the PA, so for whatever reason, but they all get money from the same source or group of sources that basically one can describe as Zionist sources as such. So then we're looking at others like maybe, I think ATM is not on their radar, but I mean 2 or 3, 4 others that do basically do not have that influence, which we feel that if we have common issues, why not? I think so. We need to be practical and realistic as well, and see in which way we can really take that corner together.
So you guys would work with ANC and EFF and so on?
We would give it a chance. Why not? Because I think essentially, as we started out, we are here for our communities.
So can I ask you a follow-up about the Zionist funding? The Oppenheimers and the Manels, or even the Rupa, whoever funds those big guys. So what if you guys find out that ANC gets funded by some of these entities, or even the EFF gets funded by some of those people? And then what?
Then we'll have to really sort of raise, because these are ethical issues that we are concerned with. They do affect our partnership.
So they must go into that group that you don't work with them.
So in the end, we will have to just break loose from that. Because I think ethically and morally, it is, how can we work with those who get funds from questionable sources? This is the
okay.
issue.
So it's clear that it looks at who gets funded from Zionist sources.
Correct. Yeah.
Who fund you guys? I know it's very expensive
No.
to run a election
Well-
campaign. And are you guys in all the provinces or only?
Remember earlier on I told you about this group that tried to...
Yeah, Bushiri.
No, not Bushiri. No, we don't get in money from
Oh, there's
Bushiri.
other people that...
who wanted to come in.
Uh.
They promised us 3 million, 10 million. In fact, there's one guy in Limpopo who promised us 3 million. They promised, literally promised. When we got there, he basically said, we're not funding you guys anymore. I mean, Alma Ganief was going there to meet him. He turned around. So basically, it's set up in the back.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's aside. We basically just depend on IC money that has come in.
The political funding.
Yeah,
I see.
correct. Because we at least we have a seat in Parliament, so at least through that seat we have an MPL, one MPL in the Western Cape Legislature. So through those sort of portals, funding has come in. So we are very much tied up to what we have been sort of getting from that, and as a result, we have been restricted. Even as we speak, I mean, there are members who are asking for resources, and we can't give them because we don't have them. But there are individuals who have given, say, 95,000 or whatever, and in that way helped us. But I think you and I know, we all know, you can't work on 1 million and 2 million. It's much more than that.
So and so you're not beholden to these individuals
Not at
that
all.
gives that 95,000 and
Correct,
all of
yeah.
that. So almost a final question. What would be the 3 things you would do? You become premier. You guys now do the thing, and you become premier of the Western Cape. What would be the 3 things that you would do? 3 or 5 things you would do in your first, it's normally they say 100 days, but I'll give you 150 days.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the areas, because I come from the educational arena, I feel education is a critical area to revisit for some of the reasons that we gave, because I think employment is an issue that is high on the agenda, and employment can only spin off from a better educational surrounding. So education is one part, of course, and that means the economy. In other words, how do we restructure part of the economy?
Remember you, the premier.
Yeah,
We're
I
not
know.
talking about national issues.
No.
Okay.
We're talking about the province.
Yeah.
Because we feel that, because we need to also question to what extent is our province out of sync with the national. So we need to see that there is a certain degree of synergy taking place. For example, the whole issue of us cutting ourselves off from the rest of the country. That is not on our agenda. Our agenda, we form part of a whole, and we remain with the whole, because we work into instance of a whole, because as a nation, we struggle together, so we work together. So like I said, it will definitely be the educational arena. The other related will be the economic environment which we are. And of course, the issue of employment, all the E's as such, because they're all interconnected as such. Then, of course, we have to look at the bridging between the rural and the urban, because I think as urbanites, we sometimes forget to what extent the rural communities play a critical role in transforming the urban. And sometimes, and as a result of that, people want to flock to the urban areas without realizing, but they are connected to the rural areas. And this is where there is unfortunately a misunderstanding between what is rural and what is urban. So we need to sort of bridge that gap through the structures that we mentioned, because after all, those industries, whether it is the fruit sector, whether it is the fisheries, all of them play a critical role in transforming the Western Cape in particular. And these are the issues that need to be addressed.
Can you tell me how people almost poverty is hectic in this province and in this country? What's the cost of a tin of pilchards? Do you know how much does that cost?
And I think even the cost of bread.
But we just talking about
pilchards. Yeah. I haven't bought pilchards, so I can't sort of give you, but I assume probably 30 Rand, 20 Rand, somewhere there, which is just far beyond what somebody who is poverty-stricken can afford. Even half a loaf these days is beyond their means. And so this is where we have to work with NGOs and so forth to really address this going for the time being as an interim space so that we can help to get those communities, and this of course to do with employment, to with semi-skilled, skilled, reskilling, all of these things contribute towards that. And I think it will help us to really address those as immediate concerns.
Okay, thanks. There's before we're done, there's one question.
I just want to take the moment out and just acknowledge your father and just give respect to your father, man. And just ask you one question. When somebody mentions your father, what is the first good memory that comes to mind?
That he was a great father, but also for the sacrifice he had done. In other words, things that we didn't know. I came to unearth in my research that he was in so many networks helping people, and that for me brings warmth to my heart.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, man.
Thanks. On that note, we doing our feel good moment. So this week I've got 3 feel good moments, positive things that I think that happened in. The one is probably a bittersweet feel good moment. You know, the building disaster in George, and as we talk, more and more people are dying. They're pulling out more bodies. But the feel good is the fact that the community of George actually pulled together, and they rallied together around those people. So that's a one feel good moment. I'll probably say some more around that disaster itself, because there's some hard truths we need to talk about. But big up, salute to the community of George for rallying together. Then the second feel good moment, also in a roundabout way, is the fact that thousands of South Africans spoke up in defense of our flag and how it was being treated with disdain by the DA during the burning of the flag advert. So that was great just to see so many South Africans speaking up and in defense of our flag. And then the third feel-good moment is that talented and beautiful and that young singer called Tyler. I think she's from Gauteng, who in spite of all of her detractors, she just continues to make a mark on the world stage. So those are the 3 feel-good moments. Some are bittersweet, but it just shows what kind of country South Africa is. And sometimes we need to focus on the good things that are happening in our country. So that's Rod's views for the night. Muhammed, Haron, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And all the best.
Appreciate it.
We'll certainly see what happens. And hopefully with that 2 million of Bashiri's people, you could get into the provincial parliament. All the best.
God knows best. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. That's Rod's views for the night, people. Oh yeah, there's some questions from a guy called Ian. About the investors. Where will the investors going to invest under your terms? That we need the investors, they don't need us. And how do you want to give them ultimatums? You got any views about that?
Well, I think basically is that we have to have policy in place that at least gives equal rights to the investor. In other words, they must give the opportunity, but they must not be here to shortchange our communities. That's the bottom line. In other words, if they come in with sincere idea of investing and benefiting, then that benefit needs to be translated into equal beneficence. In other words, the community must benefit from the investor, and the investor might benefit from his investment or her investment. So I think we need to deal with that in a very sort of open way, but understanding way.
And then there was a question around, someone said it was a good interview and so on. What's her name? Nicole van Driel. She says, fine, but if you support the death penalty, she cannot consider voting for you.
No, I understand. I think we do, but like we said, we are not openly sort of punting that now, because there's a whole constitutional rearrangement that have to happen. But we're not going to push for that. But we just need to see that our environment gives fair opportunities for whoever is innocent, proven, guilty, sort of the opportunities to really fight his or her case in an open court where at least they are given fair hearing and justice is meted.
Okay. Thanks on that. I mean, as a lawyer, I can tell you the Constitutional Court already pronounced on, I think that was probably the first case that it dealt with, and deepest condolences to Justice Yvonne Mogoro that passed away. She was one of the first justices that they dealt with that case.
Okay.
So that's Rod's views. Salute. Have a good evening, people, and drive safely home.
Thanks.
Don't worry about a thing. Every little thing gonna be alright. Singing, don't worry about a thing. Every little thing gonna be alright. Rise up this morning, smile with the rising sun. Free little bird, beside my daughter, singing sweet song of melodies pure and true, saying, this is my message to you.